to the second. I hope you all are awake. I'm a little sleepy. But we'll continue the conversation. So welcome back, and thank you all for joining us for the second part of Are You Okay? If not, it's okay. A discussion about mental health and how to address some of those issues. For those of you who did not participate in the first part of our program, I'm going to go ahead and have each of our panelists introduce themselves once again. Then we'll talk a little bit about, in this session, we want to talk a little bit about trauma. We want to talk about what it means to be a leader and how you address your anxieties and your stress as you move through this organization. This is a professional development seminar, and the goal is to arm individuals with tools so that they can move through the organization. And as you move through the organization, the higher you get, the more stress and anxiety you have on your plate, right, Mark? Okay, so. So I'm going to go ahead and start and have the panelists introduce themselves again, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Okay. Hey, everybody. My name is Kelly Randon. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I have a small private practice in Phoenix, Arizona called Linity Art and Wellness. And I've been doing counseling for about 5 years now. Before that, I was an educator. And I work with mostly adults, some teenagers, mostly people of color. And one of my specialties is in trauma.
Kelly, tell us what Linity stands for, or what it means.
You did ask that question.
I did ask. I had to look it up.
So Linity is just another word for kindness. It comes from the word leniency. So kindness.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Domenica White. My practice is called Resilient Reflections. I've been in practice for 12 years, but I've actually been in the professions, helping professions since 2005. My specialties are bonding and attachment, birth to 5 trauma, inner child healing. That's primarily my focus. I also do see adolescents, adults, and couples, but I'm mostly focused on the younger population.
Hello, Wayne Bishop, owner of New Journey Counseling Services. Not special like Linity, but New Journey Counseling Services. I've been a licensed therapist I've been a therapist for about 7 years. Before that, I was a case manager for Partnership Recovery West Valley campus while I was working on my master's degree. I have a large, broad demographic of clients. Individual clients I take, mostly Black males, minority males, or teenagers or boys. But I also contract with group homes, behavioral health group homes, outpatient programs, possibly like we was talking about, charter schools and private schools. So every walk. I do not do couples though. just don't feel comfortable getting in between that. And I think it's just knowing your craft.
I don't mind.
Right?
I'm in between. They're not a couple, but I don't like being. I don't mind being in the middle.
Right? Yep. So that's me.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. So we're going to segue into talking a little bit about trauma. And in the first section, I briefly touched on how trauma and stress have real effects on us, both mentally and physically. And the simple definition of trauma is a psychological response to a highly stressful event or series of events. These incidents can range from disasters to years of continued abuse or neglect. Emotion and psychological effects of trauma interfere with a person's ability to function. So panelists, can you please take a moment and talk a little bit about the symptoms that you see from people who are experiencing trauma? Very often we have traumatic experiences and we suppress them. And maybe they don't come back up until there's a trigger, or maybe they don't come back up until you get into therapy and then it all comes flooding out. There may have been signs and symptoms all along that you've had that you didn't realize you were experiencing. So would each of you all talk a little bit about some of the symptoms that you see related to trauma, and touch on those that are obvious and those that may not be discussed regularly?
Sure.
If you don't mind, I'll start, just because I'll probably focus more on the younger population. So since I specialize in birth to 5 trauma, a lot of people say, how is there trauma at birth? How is it possible that a child is born and there's already trauma present? So some of the things that we see in birth to 5 trauma, it could be something just as simple as an unwanted pregnancy that the mother carries through. So she's not holding her child in mind during that pregnancy. She's a little bit disappointed, right? So as we think, our brain is producing chemicals. consistently. So when child is born, the bonding and attachment may not be there. It could be a situation where the baby's born early, is in the NICU, so they're not having that touch. So early trauma can occur prenatal as well. The behaviors that I'm generally seeing in younger children with trauma, specifically when I worked with children that were in the DCS system, children who were abused, neglected, failure to thrive, things like that. We generally see in kids, they're bad. That's what we hear people saying, this kid is bad, this kid has some behaviors. You usually see the behaviors come out, sometimes some aggression. Sometimes you see the younger children with feeding issues, overeating, undereating. A lot of the things that we dismiss in children are the same things, that they're the same symptomology that we have as adults, but we dismiss it because they're children. They don't have the ability to communicate like we do, to say, hey, something's wrong with me. And so when you're looking at their behaviors, is very telling about their trauma. Sometimes you'll see physical issues, bedwetting, constipation. A lot of our trauma is held in our GI system, in our gut, where the adrenaline is produced. So in early childhood trauma, you see a lot of behavioral concerns. A lot of parents bring their kids to me, say they're not behaving. They're not behaving at home. They're not behaving at school. They don't want to eat. They're not really connecting with anybody. They have low empathy. And those are generally the symptoms that you see in the 0 to 5 population. When we're talking specifically about infants, what you'll see sometimes is the inability to connect. So when you think about holding a very healthy infant and you're a healthy parent, a lot of eye contact, a lot of reflective, you're having that reflective back and forth, you're having that dialogue and that reciprocity. When we're talking about, a 0 to 6 month old, you may not see that. They're not following, they're not connecting, they're not able to be emotionally regulated. That can be as a result of trauma, and not direct trauma. It can be vicarious, indirect. But those are some of the things you see in early childhood. And I'm sure Kelly and Wayne will really talk about what we see in adults. But it's very important to acknowledge that children suffer from mental health issues. It is a real thing. It's not just a bad child. It's not just a child who can't regulate. They're people. We all started out as children. We all have memories. Our body holds those memories. So with early childhood trauma, even though a child may not be able to verbally communicate what's happening to them, what's happened is stored in their nervous system. And so it's coming out. They're going to act out physically. So yeah.
So as you were talking, the first thing that was coming to mind is, what is the definition of trauma? And I know you kind of covered that, but just to kind of simplify it a little bit, because I think sometimes we think trauma can be so big, or a big event that has happened. But really, trauma is anything that affects you in a deep way. And that can be as simple as a racial microaggression. It can be a racial slur. It could be, a domestic violence incident. It could be something that you think you would get over easily. And you should be able to let it go. Sometimes those moments, they get locked into our bodies and into our subconscious, right? So trauma is not always something that you're aware of, that you've been through and that you're working through. Sometimes it's deeper than that, and it gets deep rooted into your psychology, right? Into your mind. And so it comes out in anxiety. It comes out in panic attacks. Depression. And a lot of times, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes the root of those issues can be undealt with or unprocessed trauma, right? Things that have happened to you that are locked into your system and have not been dealt with, right? Because the body remembers. The body remembers, even if you don't remember, sometimes your body does keep the score. That's a famous book. If you guys want to check it out, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's a book about trauma. It's very, very good. It's kind of high level, the language, but it's so good about talking about how trauma gets locked into us, and isn't always dealt with. And people of color, especially, or I don't want to limit it to people of color, but it's just a more common experience for people of color that we learn how to survive, right? We learn how to survive and get through the day, get through our lives, deal with our families, but we're in survival mode, right? Instead of really digging into the root of where the issues are coming from, right? So we get up, we go to work, we do our daily whatever, but deep inside there are wounds that we're carrying, but we've learned as adults how to cover them up, how to mask them, and how to continue moving through life, right? But is survival mode healthy? Is that is that the best way to live your life? And you can, you can get through it and be okay. We know how to be okay, right? But is it the best way that you can live? So dealing with trauma is so important.
I'm glad you brought up microaggressions because I want to talk about that and how we deal with that in the workplace.
Yeah.
So Wayne.
Kaepernick talked about that on his Netflix show. It's a good one. Everybody got their after lunch faces on. Like,
I told you.
wrap it up. See Dave Chappelle, that wrap it up button. Wrap it up. Symptoms of trauma. So I talk to my clients, like I say, I see a lot of men and mostly minorities, mostly Black and a lot of Native American Gila River population, some Latino, and a lot of guys who have a history of prison. And I have to redefine trauma, PTSD to them, because in our country, what do we associate PTSD with? Soldiers coming back from home, right? That's what it's defined for, soldiers. But I will argue that that woman who went through a divorce, that woman my mother raised 4 of us on our own, that's trauma. I don't know if anybody's a big Wu-Tang fan, but Ghostface Killer, if you watch the show, he talked about, man, I didn't know it. I was living since 8 all the way up to with depression. My dad left me and my mom in Staten Island. We don't talk about that. Women go through the trauma all the time because they raise families alone. Financial trauma is a thing, not knowing when the lights is going on, living check to check. That woman working 1 or 2 jobs, putting herself to school and making sure her kids are up, and that's trauma. My mother did that every day, right? Fathers going in and out of prison, or uncles in the that's constant. There's such thing as constant trauma, where I'm still living in it. And I know PTSD is post, but there's a constant trauma that's ongoing. Right? My parents split. There's a lot of, America's #1 in the world for divorce rates, right? And we have kids. I have friends who, my kids, over here, and then I go back to dad's, and then I go back to mom's, and that's constant trauma and emotional distress. Symptoms can be, so I just wanted to be clear on that. Trauma isn't defined. It's the disruption of your emotional wellness and ability to manage your emotions and stuff like that. And to every single person in this room, it is different.
Yes.
So the definition is defined by you.
Right.
Don't let a book, a therapist, a psychiatrist, a doctor tell you you do not or do have trauma.
Yeah.
Right? No one knows you better than you. Right?
That's right.
Yeah. You know how cool you want your sheets.
Yeah.
So the symptoms, I believe the symptoms can be physical, right? Like she said, panic attacks, sweats, headaches, oversleeping. I know we talk about things that's associated with trauma, usually come depression. People are like, oh yeah, it can be overeating or undereating, loss of sleep or oversleep, isolation, all those things, a lot of physical ones. Spiritually, losing, a lot of people, when they go through trauma and that depression is attached, I don't feel close to my God right now. I feel unworthy. So it can affect you spiritually and mentally. Trauma, studies are showing that trauma literally changes the way the brain works. It literally, so our brains are literally just supercomputers, right? Think of your brain as supercomputers, right? And your computer works. Some of us got Apples, some of us got Dells. I got a Dell right up here. I don't work that, right? When I go through trauma, the processing changes. How I view things, we get skewed thinking patterns. And I'll give an example. So let's say my trauma was growing up poor financially, single mother. I'm gonna give you a real trauma. My real trauma. My father died of a heroin overdose when I was 14, right? He left my mom after I was born. The youngest of 4, moved from Jersey to New York. New family. Knew where I was, right? That's ongoing trauma. I grew up thinking like, wait a minute. He know where I'm at. He know where I live at. He know where we live at. Okay, high school. He know I'm in the paper scoring 20, 30 points a game. I'm literally, my playing hard was to make him come see me. Trauma, didn't work, right? So how trauma affects the brain works. I start changing my thinking patterns and my belief systems. Like, okay, well, I guess That's how it is. I can depend on women, but not men. I can fight no matter what I do. He doesn't love me, or I wasn't good enough. It literally trauma has you irrational thinking and thinking patterns, and it can do that. And that is the most dangerous, I believe, me personally, because if it changes the way I think, the way I see myself in relationships, the way I see myself in the world, the way I see myself with others, then maybe I'm less likely to act on things. I'm less likely to try and accomplish things in my life, right? You know, it had me there. My irrational thinking, why bother trying to build relationships with men in my life? They all just gonna leave, you know? So those are some of the symptoms when it comes to trauma. I think.
Okay. Do any of you all relate to any of those? Yes. You know, people who relate to those? Yeah, I think we all do in some way, shape, or form. So you touched on microaggressions. Is there anybody in this room who doesn't know what a microaggression is? Oh, is there anybody who doesn't want to admit they don't know what a microaggression is? Thank you. I knew there was somebody. So would you all, one of you all, take a moment and explain what a microaggression is? And then let's talk about how that affects anyone, because a microaggression could be for anyone, specifically in the workplace.
My understanding of a microaggression is, how do I say this? It's a racial, it could be a slur, it could be something that's not necessarily direct, but you know it's based on something racial. Like the other day, an older lady, Caucasian lady, walked up and touched my hair because she thought, exactly, right? Because, you know, she thought that she had access to do that because she thought my hair was beautiful. Okay, thank you that my hair is beautiful, but that doesn't give you the right to touch it. This is my personal space, right? But those small things are what microaggressions are, and over time they build up and they can be traumatic, and they can affect how you view yourself and how you view the world. So
the number one that I'm gonna mention, because I think you all either will relate to it, some of you may have said it innocently, is to tell someone of color, you are articulate.
Yeah.
yeah.
You sure are articulate. Well, thank you. I went to school. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But that is a perfect example of a microaggression that people don't necessarily think of it as being something, but that gets into your psyche
Yeah.
over time. Yes.
I guess I just want to kind of clarify a microaggression versus being in an environment where people may not have experience working around something. So, for example, I guess it's easy to say, you know, working in government, you tend to work with older people, right? And sometimes older people want to be relatable to younger people. So, is it a microaggression when someone just doesn't have the skill to adapt to the culture that they're in when they're really trying to be relatable, but it comes off like a microaggression? Does that make sense?
I get that. Is it doesn't have the skill or don't want to be? Because older, I get it.
Worked around people, let's say, I heard Ginger and the city manager say they started together and they've worked there together for like 20 years, right? And sometimes, especially where I work, there are a lot of people that have worked together for long periods of time. They end up aging, and in some cases, people of color enter into a work environment that previously did not exist, right? And so they're trying to be relatable to you, and it comes off like, are you just not, you don't have the dance steps, or you just don't know how to dance, or are you trying to dance, and it just don't work?
Okay, I'll say to that, like, I understand completely. That was the military, the Navy. You got people from all walks of life, older, younger, different times of their life joining the military for different reasons. I'd say it is a microaggression because at the humans, just as human beings, I'm sure I can find something of every person in this room to be relatable on. It doesn't have to be to race. I don't have to say, you're pretty articulate. You know, we can find something relatable, right? It doesn't have to be based on race or culture. When it's based on that race and culture, and saying something that's associated with a stereotype, because that's what it is. You know, the stereotype is, black people can play ball, this and that, but they ain't that smart, right? So those microaggressions are connected to stereotypes, right? Because if we're just talking human beings, we can find something to be relatable on. It can be work, it can be just interests, right? It doesn't have to be that, if that makes sense.
Yep. Can I ask one?
Absolutely.
So here's a real life scenario, right? So I was born and raised in Chicago, come here, right? And the level of aggression and maybe even microaggressions or whatever, different. Chicago, someone has an issue with me.
Sorry, can you speak up because the people over at Shirley can't hear you?
Sounds good. So in one place, the aggression would be, I don't like you because of this. Here, it may be something different. So the question that I have is, when is it sometimes just me? So the example would be, I was talking to a gentleman. He says, hey, you would appreciate this. First thing comes to mind, why would I appreciate this, you know? But he ended up talking about the Stanford football game or something like that. And I just happened to have a Stanford hat on. And so I went like this to back up here. And I'm like, okay, now I'm just, you know, super hypersensitive, and maybe I should just take a step back. So I guess that's the question. How do you know when it's you sometimes, or when it's, you know, the situation and or just trauma in general?
So I think, you know, a lot of us kind of move in a space of hypervigilance just because that's kind of how we've been conditioned to kind of have our ears perked up and be on guard because it's something that, you know, these microaggressions commonly happen. And I wanted to address your first question, which was, well, what if they just aren't aware? What if they don't understand? I think it's kind of like trauma. You define if that's a microaggression. The intent often doesn't really matter across the board, right? Somebody's intent, she can say something to me and I can say, wow, that was really disrespectful. I felt disrespected. And she can say, that wasn't my intent. How I felt is really what matters, not necessarily the intent. So when it comes to microaggressions, now this is just how I feel about these things. As the person who is the recipient, you get to decide if that's what it was for you. Even if the person is saying, I had no knowledge, I wasn't aware, it still felt like a microaggression. It still hit me in a way that was very uncomfortable and I didn't like how that sat. So I think the bigger picture is kind of understanding when you kind of feel that little twinge, you know what I mean? Checking in with yourself. Am I uncomfortable with what just happened, with what was just said? I don't have to give this individual a pass because they were ignorant and because they were unaware. I'm still uncomfortable with that. Do you know what I mean? So we get to decide how we want to process information. We get to decide what's meaningful. We get to decide what's hurtful. Nobody else can decide that for us. You know, I do think it's important to be reflective and to be self-aware, but at the same time, we don't have to give passes due to people who just didn't know, or they haven't done the research, or they have not taken the time, you know, to become aware and familiar about the times that we're in, the climate that we're in. We all have the right to our feelings and how we process those and how we receive information, you know, from others.
That makes it very difficult in a work environment because sometimes you might find yourself in a situation where you have to educate your colleagues, educate your leadership, educate your policymakers about the things that they say, the perceptions that they have, and how they treat you as an employee. So that makes it difficult. That's where it goes to courageous conversations. They have a whole session about courageous conversations, a little bit different, I think, of the topic, but it falls in line with that.
Yes.
You have to be able to, we have, we have in a lot of ways a duty to educate people about how those things make us feel. So
Can I
was there
say
another?
something
Yes,
to that?
Kelly.
You know, I agree with that. I think the ideal world would be where the oppressed don't have to educate anymore. And where we don't have to have that obligation,
Absolutely.
right? Because it's unfair. It's unfair to have to educate the oppressor about the oppression.
And
right?
tiresome.
And tiresome.
And
can be.
tiresome and weighs heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, it
And
is.
that needs to be acknowledged and be, you know, to know your limits as well, as far as how much you can educate.
It is tiring, but it is tiring. And I don't disagree. That is an ideal scenario, but the only way that we can make it move
Education.
forward, in my opinion, is to take those baby steps to educate individuals. So
And educating someone can be as very simple as, I'm not comfortable with that comment.
Right.
I don't feel okay about that.
Mhm.
I'm originally from Portland, Oregon. And most times when I tell people that, they say, how many Black people left there now?
I was just about I was thinking.
And I really laugh about it. I've kind of been able to kind of grow past this. What'd you say?
Detroit.
Yeah. And listen, my husband's from Detroit, so. But it was something that really always bothered me because I was from the Northwest. I didn't present like your typical Black woman. I didn't present the way that I should. I have always struggled with my presentation because it's like, you look Black, but you don't act Black. You seem Black, but are you really Black? You don't talk Black enough. Do you know what I mean? And so those are microaggressions, and so when people say those things, like how many Black people left there now? I understand the intent isn't to get at me and to make me feel a type of way, but I'm always like, ooh, I'm a little bit insecure because I'm a Black person from the Northwest, and this is always going to come up. You know what I mean? And so even when people are not meaning to be disrespectful or meaning to be hurtful, I say, that I'm a little touchy in that area. You know what I mean? I am a Black woman. I know I come from Portland, Oregon, but that doesn't take away who I am. I am a Black woman. At the end of the day, that's what it is. And so educating people can just be very simple. Like, I'm not comfortable with that. And some will be open to the conversation, will tell me why, what happened, and some will just back off, but they will think twice before they maybe approach someone else like that. So it can be handled very, tenderly in some issues. Sometimes it's a bigger deal. Everything is context. So everything we're saying today, you have to really hear it in balance because there is no Black or white, wrong or right. We are all navigating through these spaces, and specifically as clinicians dealing with people who are navigating these spaces, we don't have all the answers. We have our own trauma, our own vicarious trauma, but it's always important to be able to speak up for yourself. When you're uncomfortable with something, the best gift that you can give yourself is to remain calm and then just pull that person to the side and say, I was uncomfortable with that. That's a very easy way to communicate without having to go into a bunch of dialogue, because sometimes it's nerve-wracking. Some people think that confrontation is conflict. No, there's healthy confrontation. It's okay to speak up and tell someone that you're uncomfortable with their questions, with their approach. And those are some of the basic skills that we do teach in therapy, is speaking up for yourself and advocating for yourself.
There was another question over here somewhere.
I had
a question, but okay. We addressed it. Okay.
How do you approach
correcting
someone or letting
All right. So thank you for that. Any more questions about microaggressions? Yes.
them
Mhm.
So, my daughter's playing her organ.
Just one moment. Let's give you the mic.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
I sent
I'm
my
not going
daughter
back.
to Oregon. So, one of my question I have for you, I grew up I was a minority in a minority here in Arizona. So I grew up on the Navajo reservation. And so every time they say, oh, where are you from? They go, you have an accent. I go, I don't have an accent. At least I don't hear that I have an accent. And they would always say, well, how many Black people were on the reservation? I'm going to say 3. 3 that I'm aware of. But I think one of the questions that I have for you is my way of, I guess, deflecting or preventing microaggression is with humor. And so I try to take away their ability. And I don't know if it's because of the repeated, like they would call me names, I was bullied. And I always go, is it because I'm Black? Just to get it out of the way. And I go, my husband loves a curvy woman, the whole thing and stuff like that. And so I don't know if humor is always going to be the best solution. And when is taking humor too far when trying to deal with certain situations? I mean, I guess is that still dependent upon me and that trying to measure what that situation would be, or am I just ignoring the big elephant in the room and not really addressing the person and making sure they understand that, yeah, that's not the way it needs to happen, or how the question that you're asking me or their behavior regarding who I am as a professional woman, Black woman. I'll use all my EEOC categories, you name it. I got 3 of them going on right now. So this kind of a hodgepodge of statements and my question.
Okay, I'm sure we can all weigh in on this, and I'll just touch on it a little bit. Humor, people always use humor as a cope, right? We can pad some serious stuff with
Yeah.
humor. It's like, I'm joking unless you're gonna do it right. Humor can be an effective coping skill, but the thing with humor is that it causes people. We kind of pad serious things with humor, and some of that is because we don't know how the person is going to receive what we have to say. So it's like, if I wrap it up in humor, then maybe it won't hit so hard, and then maybe I don't have to be responsible for their reaction, even though you're not, right? So a lot of times the humor is used to kind of gently address things, but at a certain point, it's very important to be direct and honest and say what you mean and mean what you say, because when you wrap it in humor, guess what? You're giving that other person an opportunity to go, well, I never knew it was serious because you always joked about it.
Mm.
And they may feel that way.
Mhm.
So if you're not being, humor is appropriate at times, especially if you don't know somebody, you're like, I don't think that's that funny, but you have to be honest. Moving in honesty, always the truth. I always say like this, the truth is the truth, whether it's spoken or unspoken. So go ahead and speak on it, because with the truth, we have that opportunity to make informed decisions about how we want to move forward. So, everybody's not at the place to be straight up and say, this is how I feel, and I understand that, but work toward that skill. Humor is appropriate in some circumstances, but across the board, being direct, being honest, and you can do that and be kind and friendly. It doesn't have to be confrontational. It doesn't have to be nasty. It can just say, hey, I want to talk to you about something that's been bothering me lately. And I know I've been kind of brushing it off as a joke, but it's not funny to me anymore. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're gonna go right here, please.
Can you become numb to microaggressions? I'm a little older than probably most people in here, and I was worked in the corporate world as well in the 90s, as well as I'm a retired military officer. So I got it, and I was in the reserve. So I got it all around all the time. And I just feel like I'm like numb.
I can address that. My first thought when I heard the word numb is that's a trauma response. Whenever you experience something so often, you learn automatically. It's a defense mechanism. You learn how to defend yourself by not feeling anymore. And sometimes that can be healthy, right? To get through a situation, to survive. It's a survival mechanism. But again, is it the way to go through life and go through your career? But you did what you had to do, right? So it makes sense that was the technique that you used, just kind of automatically, like, I'm going to defend myself by not letting you make me feel a certain way. So it's not a negative thing necessarily, because it got you to where you're at. It's what you had. It's the tool that you had. But is there a way to now maybe even start digging into it and see how it has affected you? You know what I mean? So it's a natural way that we deal with things. It really is.
And
Thank you for your service.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wayne, did you want to speak on that a little
Oh,
bit?
yeah. Yeah, I feel like I want to say that like we said, it can get tiring. At the base of it, racism was not created by minorities, so the burden of minorities to change that should not be on us. It should be on appropriate, intelligent, open allies, appropriate allies, right? And that's across the board. Racism towards Black, Latino, Native American. But I will say, day to day, it can get tiring. If I work, you all work for the city, so I'm sure you're in your office building, so you pretty much around the same people from time to time, right? So these microaggressions, if they happen, laughter takes away the power and the sting, right? It deflects, Wonder Woman, gold things, right? But if I said something to you, that joke, you make it into a joke, takes the accountability away from me. Because next time when you say, like, if you see, like, usually when these famous people, athletes, actors and stuff like that, they say something racist, I was just joking. Roseanne said that when she made that facial statement. I was just joking. The accountability is gone because they use that. But day to day, I've been there. When I was active duty in the military, it happened a lot. But sometimes it was just like, man, I don't have the energy for this today. And that's understandable. Please do not feel like you got to fight a battle every day, all day, because you might be thinking like today was hard enough as with these meetings back to back that my boss ain't emailed me about. Did you get the email? Okay, did all that microaggression. I still got to get home for the kids, dinner, yada, yada, yada. I really don't feel like it today because a lot of time, if I'm about to check you on it and give you that truth, which does need to happen at some point, it needs to be teachable moments, but you have to ask yourself a couple of things. Is this battle worth it right now? Because I know I want to win the war on this and check this person and redirect them. Is the person I'm about to engage with open to it be a teachable moment? True story. Kelly sees, I'm redoing my office space and stuff like that, right? I just posted, I don't do social media, but I do have a company Instagram because I post stuff about mental health wellness with men and boys. So I just put 2 pictures on my wall. One's a adult Black man pulling up a baby hands, not a baby man. That would be Shaq, right? And the other one's a hand like this holding a baby Black hand, right? Kind of like Am I My Brother's Keeper theme. So I posted that, and in the title, I'll put Black art, Black mental health wellness. 7 a.m. the next day, a colleague of mine, she's a social worker, white woman, she was like, your posts make me feel like you're anti-white. Microaggression. Okay. I didn't say anything about anti-white. That's why I got 3 kids that's half white. Okay. But that's not to be true. There are people who have me. But that I asked her and I responded. I was like, listen, are you open to this being a teachable moment? I would love to educate you why me posting my Black art and Black therapy matters is so very important, right? She responded, laugh out loud, sure, I'm always open to be educated. So I responded like, well, the history of this country, the history of this world has been teaching Black people to devalue that we're not, we're a quarter human, we're cattle, we're all that. Black girls growing up since the beginning of time, when they wanted to play with a Barbie doll, always blonde hair, blue eyes. That's subconsciously teaching me that I'm not beautiful enough. Cartoons, everything that we see on a day-to-day teaches us that we have no value. So yes, very important that I want to post Black art and Black therapy and things like that, right? So yeah, I fought St. Patrick's the other day? I did not fault anybody white for saying, I'm Irish, green. It's the same thing, right? It's that pride I have in myself and I want other people to have pride. So don't feel, it can be a lot every day if you're around your same people in your city office. Microaggression. Let me go in here and check bill from accountant today, and tomorrow, and Wednesday, and Thursday. That's a lot of checking. And guess who ends up being mostly overwhelmed and tired and just feel like, especially if Bill ain't getting it, right? So just be mindful of that.
If Bill's not, okay. Yes, can we get a microphone over here, please? Oh, yes. Can we take the question in the chat and then we'll take you?
Okay, that
Okay.
works for me. Okay, so the question is, can anyone on the panel speak to generational trauma or trauma impacting a full community? And how does this change the approach to recovery? For example, generational trauma experienced by Native Indigenous people, Japanese internment camps, etc.
I can kind of speak a little bit to the science of that. There's a lot of research going on right now on generational trauma. And science has shown us that generational trauma, there are changes that happen in a person's DNA when they're traumatized. And so those kind of changes can actually be carried on through generations, right? So there's a lot of research going on right now as far as like connection to like substance abuse in Native American communities and generational trauma, things like that. So there are connections that we're learning about. And I also think that culture and your family history and all of that plays such an important role in how your provider provides treatment for you in counseling. They have to take all of that into account because you're a whole person with a whole culture and a whole family background, right? So it always matters. It always matters. But yeah, there's a lot of research right now on generational trauma for sure.
Also, I would like to, does anybody ever heard the term mental schemas?
Mhm.
You know what that is, right? So mental schemas are our thinking patterns regarding everything. How I see myself, my view, my world stuff. You know where they're developed? By your environment, nature, nurture. Where does that start? Mom, dad, brother, sister in the home. Then it moves to my street, my block, then my neighborhood, then my school, my church. All that develops your mental schemas, how I think, how I view things, how I view the world. Well, your generations before plays a part in that, your role, your grandparents, their parents, because all those traditions are passed down to your parents, right? So generational trauma affects us because your mental schemas, part of that was developed by your generations before you, right? Right? There's a reason, like, all right, well, Soul Food Sundays, we did that. Do you think that came up because we just all Black? No. My mom was cooking soul food at Thanksgiving on Sundays, and her mom did it, and her mom did it, and her mom, and vice versa. And all those get passed down. So why is emotions and mental health any different? It's all a part generational trauma. So that'd be trauma and good things, right? And that's with every race. So your mental schemas are developed by your nurturing, your environment, right? Whether healthy or unhealthy, both. So that's generational trauma, right? If I have a generational trauma of my father, drugs, alcohol, in and out of prison, his father, drugs, alcohol, in and out of prison. And at the same time, the generational trauma from the slavery and racism. And I can see, I didn't experience it myself, but I read about in the 50s what happened to my people, in the 60s, Native American people. And I'll tell my Native American clients, and I was like, I think we'll work well together. I'm like, why you say that? Well, if you look at the history of this country and what it's done to Black people and Native American people, very similar. We were taken and placed here. You were here and your land was taken.
Mhm.
You guys were given smallpox invested things and alcohol, affected you mentally mostly. They separated the men from the women. I don't know if you know the history of Indian School Road, but those used to be preparatory schools where they would take Native American kids away from their families,
Mhm.
cut their hair off, beat them if they spoke their native tongue, and make them linear and trying to get them to conform, right? What do they do with slavery? Separate the families, beat them, all that stuff, right? So similar, right? Look at those both not still affecting Native American and Blacks today. Prison systems filled with Blacks, Native Americans, Latinos, still struggling. Generational trauma is a real thing,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
So that's what I wanted to share about it.
And we talked a little bit in the first session, I believe you, all of us might have brought it up about how trauma lives in our nervous system, right? So even if we don't have it here in our memory, it's in our subconscious and is living literally in our DNA. So when you think about slavery and all the different things that have happened and the stress that people were under, that changes your brain, okay? So if your brain is changed, right, and then you're giving birth, the child that you're giving birth to, things may be changed there. So generational trauma is also, it's environmental, but it also is what's living in your DNA, what's living in your nervous system. So it's important to keep that. It's just passing down because it's traditional. Sometimes it's really in you. It's really flowed through your bloodline.
So this hour has gone by very, very quickly. We have one last question. Come on up. And I want to say hello to all the people in virtual land. I didn't forget about you, but I did.
Hey,
So
guys.
hello
Can
to
you
you.
Can you put a space background?
Right.
Do that.
How you doing, guys? I moved from a place that was 70% African American, and I moved here in 2014. And to my surprise, it was 7% African American when I moved here. So I grew up seeing people that look like me in high level places, thinking I can do this. And when I got here, those microaggressions built up where it was like, man, I can't do this. And so my question is, do you think that when those microaggressions build up, can you create your own trauma? Because I feel like, I don't know if anybody, especially Black men, can relate, but I feel like I built this facade where I have to be perfect in order to elevate. And so it's a lot of pressure, because you You don't want to go in those meetings and wear a polo shirt. You got to come to the meeting like this just for people to hear you, right? So is that creating your own trauma, or is the microaggressions building up, creating the trauma? What are your opinions on that?
I believe, as I know exactly, it's creating unrealistic thinking patterns, like unrealistic expectations of yourself, like the microaggressions. So they're changing your lifestyle for you. I mean, you look like a lawyer with that sharp three-piece suit. I see you. So like, if you're like, okay, all the other lawyers, I'm just going to say all the other lawyers, if they say Friday, we wear our polo team, our football, it's football season, we can wear our jersey, you still going in with three-piece suit on. Business. Hey, we said it was a down day. What's your name, brother? Charles, we said it was a down day. Yeah, I know, but got some things to tackle and I want to take care of it. But it's compensating and unrealistic. How long are you going to do that for? And how long is it going to start to turn into anxiety, depression, lower self-worth and value, right? I would love to be appreciated for the great lawyer that I am. Without see me. Don't see, don't just put on your prejudice and your stereotypes, because again, microaggressions are attached to stereotypes that are racist, okay? All right, so if I'm saying them, it's because of the person that's in it, their mental schema that they develop, right? That's where they come from. So that's going to affect you mentally and emotionally, right? You're going to find yourself leaving undervalued, even though you did a damn good job in winning that case and made partner and all that stuff. You can make partner at the law firm and you still find yourself going above and beyond to overcompensate, unrealistic. So I would be mindful of that. Not every day, like I said, but at some point in time, ask yourself, when can I make one of these microaggressions a teachable moment? Know your audience. If it's going to be like that social worker who said that about my post, I asked her, do you want to know why I did this? And she would have said something like, no, it doesn't matter. You just, okay, not a teachable moment. That's the audience she doesn't want to know. So who you work with, I'm sure the same people around the same day. Start asking yourself, the ones that give you microaggressions, and when you go in next week and stuff like that, first take Monday off, first of all. Tell them take Monday off. Take Monday off. But when you go in Tuesday, just be like, microaggressions. Who can I start making teachable moments with? And if it's your boss, he hired you, I would think he would want you to be happy and to do a great job. So he should be open to that, or she should be.
Or she hired
that's
you.
right.
Thank you.
That's right. Girl power, right on.
So I have one more thing, 5 more minutes. If you guys need to leave, please do so. But 5 more minutes, I want to talk about one other thing. Who in this room does not know what code switching is? Raise your hand. Somebody doesn't know what code switching is. All right. You need to know. So let's take 5 minutes to talk about code switching. You all have something to say about it.
You do, huh? I can see it on you.
I mean,
Go ahead.
So the definition of code switching is when you switch your language, right, to fit a certain environment.
Yes.
So African-American vernacular, hey y'all, what's up, girl? Like if that's how you normally talk with your family and friends, when you get in a business environment, you automatically switch that off. And it's almost like a subconscious thing. You don't really consciously know you're doing it, but you're switching your language to fit your environment. And so, I guess I've never really thought about how that in itself could perpetuate trauma or anxiety or anything, but I could see how that would even cause stress, undue stress, having to do that all the time. So
You may be one person at home and a completely different
Right. Yeah.
person at work.
yeah.
I don't talk this proper all the time, but
Right.
but it can be exhausting. And it's not just Black people, it's any person who is of a different race, religion. You switch it up when you get home, and it can be exhausting, but it's something that causes stress on people.
Yeah.
Do you guys
It's a
have something
coping
else to say?
skill. I mean,
Yes.
it's a way to
Mhm.
cope too.
Mhm.
If you know that people are going to have these preconceived notions and you want to come in and prove them wrong, kind of like what you were saying, Charles, at times we have core beliefs that are developed based on the misfortune. So a core belief, I have to be a top performer. I can't mess up. I can't miss the mark. I have to be on point all the time. the core belief is that, you know, I'm a Black woman, and if I fail, then they're going to be right, you know? So kind of, you know, making sure that the things that you go through don't develop distorted thinking and those beliefs like I have to always be here, because we're not going to always be here. But it's a coping skill, and our brain's job is to protect us at all costs. So if it notices a pattern, it's going to make sure that, you know, we protect ourselves. So that's how sometimes unhealthy coping skills work, because it keeps us safe. Kind of like what you're saying, you became numb. It wasn't a healthy coping skill, but it got you through what you needed to go through. So the code switching, you know, we do that because we want to be accepted. I can't come in here talking wild and ratchet, even though I probably can, right? But I'm going to be, you know, I'm concerned about how my audience receives me. Now, when we're in therapy, if you ever come to therapy with me, I tell my clients all the time, I'm going to be myself. Sometimes I say some things that might seem wild and inappropriate, but I have to be myself, and I have to show up as me. If I show up as anything else, you're responding to something that's not genuine and authentic, you know? So in sessions with me, I don't code switch. So if you want to come mess with me, we do a lot of it's not this, you know what I mean? Because you have to be in a space where you can be expansive and you can be yourself, because so often we have to shrink and we have to minimize and we have to fit into these small places. Therapy is a place where you don't have to do that. You should not have to do that. If you're going into therapy and you're having to shrink and change who you are, you're probably not in the right space, you know? But code switching it's a real thing. I practice it on the daily. It's something that, you know, is still kind of required, so to speak, in certain spaces. It's something that we just have to do again, but it is a coping skill. It's a protective factor, it's a protective measure to stay safe and to stay guarded and protected. Yeah.
We need a microphone, and then this is going to be our last question. We'll close down.
Hi. So as a mom of three, a young adult, two teenagers, pray my strength on all three. How do we teach our children to not code switch? So this is me every day, except for when I yell at my kids to clean their space or they have to get out of my house. And they're like, you're not like that at work. And I'm like, I'm like this at home as well. And they're like, not right now when you just yelled. So I'm teaching them a learned behavior unintentionally. So how do us as parents not do that to our children? Because I feel as though I'm teaching them a learned behavior, you know? So how do we not teach them that type of learned behavior?
So I'm sorry, can you clarify the question just a little bit?
How do we teach our children not to code switch?
Okay. You know, I'm going to give you my honest answer, because I could say a lot of different things, but this is the honest answer. They're going to have to at some times. The thing is, it's beautiful to be your authentic self all the time. But we all know the truth of the matter is we don't always get to show up authentically. So what I teach my children is you're valuable, you're wonderful, you're beautiful. Talk how you talk, walk how you walk, speak how you speak. There's certain times when you're big, expansive self, you got to pull it in, not shrink, but pull it in just a little bit. Do you know what I mean? I think the biggest picture is the language that we use, we can change that up all the time. My thing is, are you showing up as your authentic self? Whether you're saying, hey girl, or hey, how are you doing? Are you showing up as yourself? And I think that's the most important thing. And always telling your children, you're not as a parent, I'm a therapist, I'm a mom, I'm not perfect, right? I missed the mark. Being able to apologize, being able to say, you know what, I showed you this one thing, but I realized this is a better way to do it. Always being able to make accommodations for mistakes, room for growth, room for creativity, room for correction. I think just teaching them that they're going to make mistakes, they're not going to always hit the mark, and teaching them that we are in a society that requires you to shapeshift it sometimes. It would be great if we could all sit up here and say, you know, always be yourself. You never have to switch. You never have to kind of pull back. That's not reality. You know what I mean? That's not the truth. So just making sure that they are themselves. Even when I have to code switch, I'm not becoming a new person. I'm just changing the way that I speak so that the listener can receive what I have to say. Does that help? Okay.
I apologize. Work. So was this helpful? Was this interesting? You need a part 3? Okay. We can arrange that. We can arrange that. I hope that for those of you, this was your first session, you missed the first part, which was fantastic too. But for those of you who were able to join both sessions, I hope that I hope that all of you all got something out of this. I hope that you take something away. I hope that you learn something, that you find something that you will either research further, you will talk to someone about, you will guide someone or suggest that they go and get therapy. You will suggest, for those of you who missed the first session, we talked about Reiki, that's a whole thing, that you learn what some of those things are and how they can help you to get through this life that we're all living, because it's difficult. And the session again is called, Are You Okay? If not, it's okay. That's kind of where we all are, but do something about helping to get yourself incrementally to be okay. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Sandy's gonna take a picture of us.
Oh,
Who's
cool.
student?
Yes.